I'm Taylor Riggs and for Emily Chang, and this is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all of our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up, tech sector reports, Netflix, IBM, and Texas Instruments all out with earnings, streaming, semis, and some surprises in the mix. We've got you covered. Plus, the United Nations links Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the 2018 hacking of Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos' phone. We'll have details. And cloud and AI. We talk big themes shaping the big tech when we hear from Microsoft, Satya Nadella, and Alphabet's Sundar Pichai from Davos. And we begin with tech earnings that all began this week in earnest. Netflix, IBM, and Texas Instruments all reported. Tuesday brought us Netflix's fourth quarter results, which showed subscribers surpassed a 100 million milestone outside the U.S., a boon for its international footprint. But the company also cautioned on subscribers this quarter, saying growth would not be as robust. We covered it all with eMarketer's Eric Hagstrom and True Optics CEO Andre Swanston.
They're pretty strong in the developed markets already, so there's not a whole lot of growth specifically for them in the U.S. Looking abroad, they have a lot of room to grow, but that growth is going to be difficult. When you talk about that 7 million subscriber guidance, it's actually compared to pretty strong Q1 in 2019. So when you look at the year-over-year comparisons, it's a very strong or weak comparison compared to last year.
Andre, let me get your thoughts on this, because typically they've been a little bit conservative when they forecast some of their guidance. Do you feel Netflix is being conservative, or is there a real potential slowdown underway?
I've long said, I think, probably almost a year now, that the real competition for Netflix really starts in 2020. And I still believe that to be so. And so if I were them, I also would be conservative, because I do think that it's going to be difficult to tell what the full impact of all these other new solutions will truly be on Netflix in the first quarter. And second quarter, probably even more so than Q1.
Eric, I want to come quickly, I'm doing this in real time, and take a look at a chart here that I'm showing inside my terminal, because you mentioned how the U.S. domestic market is a very mature market. Mm-hmm. And you can see, of course, in the fourth quarter, it was that U.S. market that has struggled. Is that normal, like you said, given it's a mature market, or would you like to see more U.S. subscribers really coming online?
Well, again, subscriber growth in the U.S. is going to be lumpy moving forward. And that's largely because they're already reaching well over 50% of all U.S. households. Now, there is more growth for them, but when you consider that more people watch Netflix than actually subscribe because of, obviously household sharing, but also password sharing with people outside their household, there's not a whole lot of room for them to grow anymore within the U.S. in terms of subscribers. But they still offer a great value to consumers, and they can continue to raise prices moving forward.
Andre, I want to get your thoughts a little bit more on that competition that you were talking about. I so often hear that domestic user is a much more valuable customer because they're more profitable. I know that the growth is internationally because it's less of a mature market, but that customer over there isn't as profitable. It's not as valuable. How do you view the mix between both domestic subscribers and the international subscribers as well?
Yeah, so I think the domestic subscriber is actually much more important in terms of, especially over the next year. And I would disagree with what the common thought is from a lot, that Netflix can increase revenue by just increasing the price. Netflix is now actually priced at a premium compared to their competitors, with Comcast announcing Peacock having a free tier, with the Disney Plus coming in at a cheaper price, and there's Pluto TV and others that are now free streaming online. So the real challenge for Netflix is going to be, I don't even think it's going to be client growth. I think retention of clients is going to be much more of a difficult thing domestically than I think people are giving it credit for, because there's so much more free solutions that are coming on and cheaper price solutions. More content is being pulled from Netflix, and I just don't think they can spend their way out of it like they have in the past.
That was eMarketer's Eric Hagstrom and True Optics' Andre Swanston. IBM pleased Wall Street this week by beating 5 consecutive quarters of declines when it reported fourth quarter results Tuesday. The company's push into the hybrid cloud market appears to be paying off. I got perspective from CFRA market research firm equity analyst David Holt.
with the FX impacts, those were slightly smaller and expected, about 60 basis points versus about 100. Divested businesses were in line with the expectations of around 200 basis points, but really when you look beneath and kind of dig a little deeper, Cloud and Cognitive was towards the higher end of expectations of around 9%. High single-digit growth was expected, but surprisingly, transaction process platforms actually grew, even bumping up against some tough comps from the year prior. On top of that, you did have the Z15 mainframe ramp, which actually grew about 16% as a whole with the segment itself, and IBM Z, which is the mainframe, grew about 60% too.
And David, I want to dive down into the different sectors of the business. But first, as you look forward to 2020, do you believe the promises of a sustained return to revenue growth and margin expansion?
So I think a lot of it comes down to a stronger dollar. And when you kind of look at this on a constant currency basis, if those currency headwinds do abate in the second half, especially with some of the contribution that you're getting from Red Hat, which on a normalized basis is growing mid-20s as of this quarter, and it's accelerating, scaling through some of their own services segments, which is about 60% of the revenue. So that right there is probably the key component to revenue growth on a constant currency and continual basis into 2020.
I want to talk more about that cloud revenue growth. Where do they stand relative to competitors? You mentioned they purchased the Red Hat acquisition around 2018. They spent $34 billion on it. Where does that now position them among the other competitors in this hybrid cloud strategy?
I think this puts them more in a middle layer opportunity, especially when you're considering linking towards some of their consulting divisions with GBS or Global Business Services. It definitely does not put them, face to face with some of the other bigger competitors in the space when you mentioned Google or Amazon, but more so that niche play and some of the workflows that actually can be scaled through to their services, which is a value add and hopefully drives growth and margin expansion for 2020.
That was David Holt of CFRA. Chip industry bellwether Texas Instruments was able to beat analyst estimates when it reported Wednesday, but not by much. Shares fell after trading near record highs Wednesday. For insight, I caught up with Bloomberg Technology's Ian King after the company's call.
Things are not getting worse, was the key takeaway. I mean, if you look at the percentage of declines in revenue over the last 5 or 6 quarters, the rate at which it's getting worse is abated, shall we say. So that was the key takeaway. The reason that the stock kind of popped initially and then sort of ended up slightly in negative territory was people were expecting a little bit more.
You also were talking with the CFO. Yeah. What are they saying?
Right. So the key thing sort of underneath here is that the overall forecast would actually have been a little bit better if it wasn't for one market, and that's the communications equipment market, selling into things like base stations for cell phones. That market, he said, is going down hard, not getting better, and therefore that's dragged down the overall forecast. More important to Texas Instruments markets like automotive, markets like industrial, they're actually close to turning in positive, which again is very good for the overall economy and the company.
I want to dive down into these numbers just a bit. You're jumping off the analyst call, you're here, like you said, revenue top line slowing, but slowing less than we thought it would.
Correct, yeah.
What's going on? Because we had so much optimism coming into this about the chip makers.
Right. I mean, what Texas Instruments said is normally when you get into a normal industry cycle, you have about 5 quarters of declines. We're past that point.
We're there.
And they've said that things were extended because people remain cautious because of the China trade dispute. China's obviously the largest market for chips. It's a big market for Texas Instruments. That is starting to show signs of improvement, so things aren't growing yet, but the rate at which they're getting worse is abated.
So talk to me about the exposure to China. If they're talking about macro headwinds, China trade tensions, we got the signing of phase 1. How much of that headwind could now become a tailwind?
Yeah, again, it's complicated. What made communications equipment a year ago really good was Huawei went out there nervous that it was going to get blacklisted, nervous about the consequences, and bought a load of chips. This quarter, it's not doing that, so the comparisons are negative. So there are puts and takes on both sides of that. The overall, I think, Texas Instruments was trying to say, look, this is also a macro sort of sentiment kind of thing. As long as people are less concerned that we're in this kind of deathmatch sort of trade dispute with China, then there is hope that there will be a return to normalcy.
That was Bloomberg Technology's Ian King. Coming up, the cloud and AI, two fronts tech is pushing into big time, and we'll hear from Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella and Alphabet CEO Sundar Pichai on both next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella sat down with Bloomberg News editor-in-chief John Micklethwait at the World Economic Forum in Davos Tuesday. Among other things, Nadella discussed Microsoft's cloud endeavors as well as competition with Amazon and Google.
It came down to saying, look, what is Microsoft's responsibility? We are increasingly becoming a big consumer of energy because of what we're doing with the cloud, and it sort of, was very clear to us that given the science that climate change requires immediate action, this is the decade. And so we wanted to start by saying, look, let's make some good commitments. And the commitment to being carbon negative by 2030 means we will now have to make sure that all of our data center operations are first consuming renewable energy. And then also we take all the carbon that we have put out and ensure that by, either through new technology or by natural means, we can take it out and become carbon negative.
And that, as I understand it, that is all the historical carbon you think.
And that'll be by 2050. So we want to go back to all the way to 1975 when we were founded, and we take out all the historical carbon as well. And that's the other commitment. And when it comes to the billion-dollar fund, we do need real breakthroughs. This is no one company is going to do this, and so therefore we are very committed to sort of putting even our own balance sheet money on it, and then looking to see the ecosystem.
Microsoft is one of those companies that's pushed quite hard against the sort of current flavor of, I suppose, immigrant bashing. Do you think that that is being changed in America?
I think, first of all, America is a country of immigrants. It's a nation formed by immigrants. And to me, when I look at the contribution that immigrants even going forward can make is something that I think the United States should be absolutely tapping into. And so that is what I speak to, and that's what I think the Microsoft has benefited from it. I personally have benefited from it. So we are clear in terms of why immigration and enlightened immigration policy continuing in the United States is perhaps one of the most important things for its own competitive advantage.
Do you worry that it's now getting slightly unenlightened?
Not really. I mean, I think still America is the place where people want to come to. One of the things that's happening is every country is rethinking what is in their national interests. Borders are real. People think about immigration policies that help. But I think in there, they have to maintain that modicum of enlightenment and not think about it very narrowly. And that's what has, I think, made it possible for those values that have helped people come be the attractor. It's not about, people only will come when people know that you're an immigrant-friendly country.
Do you think the number coming from the cloud side is going to continue to grow as a proportion?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, right, 5% of the world's GDP is tech.
Yeah.
That's going to double by 2030 to 10%. And so if you think about being in the cloud business, and especially being in the cloud business across all these layers, means you get to participate in it. But the real thing is, it's not about the 10% of the tech spend. What about the other 90% of the GDP? To me, what is of deep interest is to see that broad sectoral productivity growth really shape up because of digital technology and the contributions we make.
And one thing on that, you are still behind Amazon on that. How do you close that gap? And are you worried at all about Google?
I mean, look, we're going to have we have had competition in the past, in the previous era, and this era we have new competitors, and we feel very, very good about our position. If you think about, 5 years ago is when we started talking about hybrid cloud and the edge, and today it's now the conventional wisdom. So I feel like we even, if anything, have an architectural advantage in terms of what the next innings of the cloud is, and that's what you see play out in the marketplace.
Architectural advantage, particularly over those two companies, over Amazon and Google?
Yeah, because we built effectively a distributed computing fabric, recognizing that computation is going to be more distributed than it's not just the cloud, it's the cloud plus edge. And so with something like 5G, you see that play out in a big way.
That was Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella. Now, the CEO of Google has left no doubt about how important he thinks artificial intelligence will be. Sundar Pichai says AI will be more profound than fire or electricity. In Davos, Pichai stated that current frameworks to regulate AI in the U.S. and Europe are a great start.
I've said this before, AI is one of the most profound things we are working on as humanity. It's more profound than fire or electricity or any of the other bigger things we have worked on. It has tremendous positive sides to it, but it has real negative consequences. When you think about technologies like facial recognition, it can be used to benefit. It can be used to find missing people, but it can be used for mass surveillance. And as democratic countries with a shared set of values, we need to build on those values and make sure when we approach AI, we are doing it in a way that serves society. And that means making sure AI doesn't have bias, that we build and test it for safety. We make sure that there is human agency, that it's ultimately accountable to people. About 18 months ago, we published a set of principles under which we would develop AI as Google. Mm-hmm. But it's been very encouraging to see the European Commission has identified AI and sustainability as their top priorities. Mm-hmm. And US put out a set of principles last week, and be it the OECD or G20, they're talking about this, which I think is very, very encouraging. And I think we need a common framework by which we approach AI.
Are you satisfied with those frameworks you said, which have been developed until now? I mean, you referred to the OECD framework, G20 framework.
It's an early start.
Yeah.
But I'm very encouraged that they have a lot of commonality, and that's because they are rooted in common human values. So I think it's a great start, but we need to get more specific and evolve it significantly. I think the European Commission is working on a white paper around AI, and I think that's an important first step, and we all need to engage. As a company, we are committed to engaging in the process, but it's going to need everyone from around the world. AI is no different from climate. You can't get safety by just having one country or a set of countries working on it. You need a global framework to arrive at a safer world there.
That was Alphabet CEO Sundar Pichai. Coming up, what Facebook is doing to avoid making the same mistakes of the 2016 elections. We'll hear from the company's EMEA vice president next. And the coronavirus wreaks havoc with global health and travel ahead of one of the most heavily trafficked periods ever, Chinese New Year. More on its impact just ahead. This is Bloomberg. Facebook remains under fire after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which came to light in 2018. Then it was revealed the firm had harvested the personal data of millions of people's Facebook profiles without their consent and used it for political advertising purposes. As you can imagine, it remains a sensitive topic going into the 2020 elections. But Facebook's EMEA Vice President Nicola Mendelsohn assured leaders the scandal was a thing of the past. She spoke to Bloomberg's Francine Lacqua in Davos.
I think the mood is different this year, and I think the reason it's different is because there's a much more thoughtful conversation going around now about how globally business, governments can be actually working together with the tech companies. I also think there's an acknowledgement of the investments that Facebook has been making across so many different areas that, we've had a lot of scrutiny. And sometimes in the past, that scrutiny has been deserved. And so I think it's been good. There's also been a lot around economic impact. What is the economic impact of the tech companies? And actually, there's been a lot of welcome positive reception to that. So there was a research survey just come out, a report by Copenhagen Economics, specifically looking at Facebook, something that we commissioned. And it talked about the fact that in Europe, we can actually see that through small businesses, the 25 million small businesses that are actually out there utilizing our platforms, that it's been responsible for generating over 200 billion sales in the last year, which when the economics kind of look at that and model that out, that's over 3 million jobs that have been created.
But when you speak to ministers here, do they ask you about regulation? Do they ask you how you use the data? Do they ask you actually what your purpose is if you're a force for good that you were just mentioning?
Yeah, we have a lot of conversations about regulation. And if you remember, that's something that Mark Zuckerberg's been calling for a long time now, about how we can work with governments around the world, as we have been doing with a number of different governments around the world, actually looking at the different areas of regulation. But also, let's be very clear, we already have regulation.
Right, GDPR. About. How has that changed Facebook?
Well, one of the things that we did, it's actually changed us a lot, because we actually put in a whole new process in terms of making sure that people were aware of the information that was being collected from them, who they were sharing it with, giving them options as to what they wanted to do. And actually, that's something that we're continuing to evolve with as well. And we didn't just do it in Europe, where it was actually regulated. We thought it was very considered and useful way of thinking about things. So we actually rolled a lot of that out around the world as well.
We're in a political election year, really around the world, but mainly in the US. Has Facebook really changed the ways that some of these things get, pushed around?
Yeah, definitely. I would say we've changed fundamentally in the way that we approach elections. And, thinking back to that 2016 election, the threats then were very different to what we understand and could have imagined even back then. It wasn't just us that missed it. Governments around the world missed it, intelligence agencies around the world missed that sort of threat. But what we've done is by the investments that we've made, we've actually had, since then, probably over 100 different elections around the world. And every time we're increasing the scrutiny that we place on, the safety that we're placing on. And so come this 2020 election, it will feel very different. And the reason being is the things that we've introduced. So we've introduced the fact that political parties have to be kind of checked with us and authorized with us, that the fact that when ads run from political parties, that it actually says that it's paid for by that political party, and then all those ads go and sit in an ads library, and actually then you can go and have a look, anybody can go and look and actually see the different messages that the different parties are putting out.
How can we be so sure that actually there's no manipulation, interference from another side that we haven't figured out yet?
Yeah, so one of the other things that we are looking at, and we're not just waiting for elections anymore for this, we're looking at patterns of inauthentic behavior that are coming from big networks. And again, back in 2016, we took down none. In the last year, we took down 50, and we report all the time when we see these different networks out there. But we stay ever vigilant. We know it's kind of a race to make sure that when we kind of feel that we've kind of got better control, that there's other things that could happen. So we're very alert to the risks that could be there.
What's the potential for ads on WhatsApp?
So it's not something that we're progressing at the moment. It's very still early days. We're very still making sure that that the way that people are using the platform, that's the most important thing, and it's growing very nicely from that side.
So what will what will make you decide? Do you worry that people will be put off it, or what are you trying to figure out, and in what time frame?
So we're just looking at the moment in different ways, and we do tests all the time. I mean, one of the things that you'll see as a tech company is across all of our different platforms that we're always looking at different ways to evolve. But we also do it cautiously and carefully, and in a way that works both for the businesses but also for the people that use the platforms as well.
That was Facebook EMEA Vice President Nicola Mendelsohn. Coming up now, hiring. Chinese internet giant ByteDance wants a new CEO for its TikTok business. Among the requirements, must love ads. We'll have all the details next. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network at QuickTake on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Taylor Riggs. This week brought new concerns about global health as officials in China announced more deaths related to the coronavirus. So far, more than 600 people worldwide have been confirmed with the virus. Travel was all but halted in Wuhan, China, where coronavirus was first detected. Airports all around the world, including some in the U.S., began screening passengers, and World Health officials scrambled to respond.
一是严防死守。
We will take strict measures to contain the disease in Wuhan. We have asked Wuhan City and Hubei Province to take the strictest possible prevention and control measures.
As for what's at stake, we can look at China's GDP as compared to the rest of the world. The Chinese economy is a lot more integrated with the world today than 17 years ago during the SARS outbreak. But as for industry, some companies with heavy exposure to Chinese travel weighed in from Davos.
I think the hospitals and communities are much better well prepared compared to the SARS stage. So we are working very hard with the doctors and industry. And C-Trip just announced that if our customers are diagnosed to have the virus, we'll cover all the costs for the cancellation, changes, and delay of their trips.
When you talk about travelers, though, right, Ajit, it's always about sentiment. The fear is always there that it could happen to me. If you take a look at how tourism contributes to the GDP, in India it's 9%, in China it's 11%. What kind of impact, even initially, could we see?
It can be really devastating. There's no question about it. But this is, early days yet. And let's see how things develop. We know from our experience that this can have a tremendous impact. People coming in from outside, so much of tourism happens through word of mouth. And when you're seeing every day in newspapers an outbreak or some incident happening, you have, so many alternatives and so many options and so many places that you can potentially go to. And then you think, why the hell should I go to, this one particular place where there is a problem? So it can have a tremendous impact. I think we need to contain it as soon as we possibly can and communicate that it's been contained. So the communication is almost as important as controlling the problem itself.
The timing couldn't be worse for China or Hong Kong. I mean, we're leading up to the Lunar New Year holiday. In terms of the bookings, are you seeing any signs at all that it is impacted?
Yeah, I think for the impacted area, people are very careful not to travel out. And if it's not necessary to go inside that zone, we don't encourage people to go there. However, if there is no signs of being infected, no signs of being contacted by the patients, it's probably okay right now.
What is the psychology in India? What is the psychology of the Indian traveler? Are they likely, you said it's early days, are they likely, though, to take those precautions?
Indians are a little more adventurous, I would think, and are not as impacted and as quickly impacted as many travelers around the world. But Indians go to Hong Kong often, and we have flights to Hong Kong. Those flights don't seem to be impacted by this particular problem as yet. Of course, the problems in Hong Kong themselves have impacted traffic to a significant extent. But we haven't seen the impact of this particular outbreak at this time. So I say it's early days.
That was Trip.com CEO Jane Sun and SpiceJet founder AJ Singh from Davos. Chinese internet giant ByteDance is seeking a new CEO for its TikTok business. TikTok is that hugely popular video app that American politicians have targeted as a potential security threat. For more, I talked to Bloomberg Technology's Kurt Wagner Wednesday.
There's two big reasons. One is that TikTok is under a lot of regulatory pressure right now in the United States. Its ties, to China have led some to believe that maybe it's a security risk. And I think there's some who also think that having a larger presence on the ground here in the U.S. might help appease some regulators.
And what does that mean for the company? Because they talk about the technical, the product, the engineering still being based from a CEO in China, but this non-technical CEO to be in the U.S., I guess, sort of to help, the regulation part of all this.
Yeah, so the way that it was described to us is that it would this role would not necessarily be everything that you would think of as a usual CEO. This person would see more the business and operations side. So that might include, policy. That would include probably PR, marketing, but also advertising. And that's kind of the other big reason I was told that they want someone on the ground here, is that when you're in Asia, it's hard to build a big business in the West from Asia. And so they want people on the ground who are going to be able to help, shepherd this potential advertising business through.
What do we know about the advertising business so far?
Well, it's still growing, of course, but when you look at TikTok, hundreds of millions of users, it's really exploded in the US, especially over the last 18 months or so. And so there's a lot of people who believe it has a ton of potential. I don't think it's necessarily Facebook potential or Google potential, but certainly Snap potential, Twitter, that kind of thing. And so again, the US is the most valuable market for advertisers. Facebook has proven this quarter after quarter. There's a lot of people who believe that a service like TikTok could, make a big splash here. They want someone who can lead that.
We've been talking in the last few months about ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, potentially maybe spinning off or selling off a portion of TikTok in order to help improve relations with the US. How are those conversations going?
So we don't have an update from what we reported a few weeks back, which was that these discussions have happened internally. There is some, it's interesting with the CEO conversation is that could they put someone here that might, oversee TikTok were that ever to actually happen. Now, the company has said, ByteDance has said, this is not something they're discussing, but obviously Bloomberg has reported differently. And it does seem like a realistic possibility that if, regulators were to say, if you want to operate here, you have to totally disconnect from, your Chinese kind of bosses. Yeah. Maybe this new person would then take the reins.
That was Bloomberg Technology's Kurt Wagner. Coming up, the United Nations links Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to that 2018 hacking of Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos' phone. We'll have details next. And later, Tesla hits another milestone, trailing only Toyota. We'll tell you why. This is Bloomberg.
Melinda Gates, thank you so much for joining us on Bloomberg Studio 1.0.
Bill and I always look for any philanthropy we do to fill some of those gaps.
I'm Emily Chang, and this is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from this week in tech.
I think Facebook's how we won in a lot of ways. Do you ever take any of the tips and give them to your LA Clippers coach?
No! I will stand up for Canadian interests. I will only sign a deal that is good for Canada.
Coming up on Bloomberg Best, the stories that shape the week in business around the world.
Welcome to Bloomberg Big Decision. Really good to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me today.
We know this business inside and out.
You've really built a conglomerate.
We saw amazing opportunities in the Middle East.
They had the dream, you had to bring it to reality.
Between the three of us, we can really do anything.
I feel like this is where we should go.
United Nations called this week for an investigation into allegations that the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, was involved in hacking the cell phone of Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. Officials say information suggests that Bezos' phone was hacked following a WhatsApp exchange with the Crown Prince. Saudi Arabia's finance minister spoke exclusively with Bloomberg on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in Davos.
I think the embassy in Washington, Saudi embassy in Washington, issued a statement last night or early this morning saying clearly that this is absurd. They called for an open investigation so that people know what happened.
A report by UN experts say the alleged hack may have been an effort to influence or even silence the reporting of the Washington Post, which Bezos owns. For more, I spoke to Bloomberg's Elisa Sebenius from Washington.
speaking to sources today, what I've been hearing is this call for understanding what actually went on. Even as these reports have been coming out about a digital forensic analysis and the UN released a report detailing how this hack occurred, there still seems to be some ambiguity. So, for example, many think that it was perhaps certain spyware that was used and was put onto the phone of Jeff Bezos via a WhatsApp message that contained an MP4 video. However, until we further understand if this was spyware, it remains to be seen, whether there will be calls to try to regulate the sale of those kinds of tools, whether there will be calls to make sure that this kind of thing can't happen simply by sending a video over WhatsApp.
Lisa, how sophisticated is Saudi Arabia in their hacking efforts, in their cyber warfare, shall we say?
I think this is an example of, the way that nation states can use cyber tools to really try to exert influence where maybe they're not going to use a conventional tool to try to silence Washington Post coverage of Saudi Arabia. That's not the kind of thing that a conventional tool of statecraft can accomplish. So this really shows the way that cyber has been increasingly used by states in recent years to try to exert influence in ways that weren't previously possible.
And Elisa, as we try to analyze some of the security measures taken on by some of these technologies as well, in your broad reporting of cybersecurity, how do companies like an Amazon, like a WhatsApp, also try to protect themselves from this type of attack, for lack of a better word?
So I think really understanding what is in this digital forensic analysis, doing follow-up, seeing, what needed to happen in order for this video to be sent to Bezos by the account of the Saudi Crown Prince and then result in the hacking and surveillance, which is looking likely of his phone. So really understanding how this came about and then, implementing security measures that will prevent it from happening in the future will be key in the coming weeks and months.
That was Bloomberg's Elisa Sebenius. Bloomberg also learned this week that Apple suppliers will start assembling a low-cost iPhone next month. The company is expected to officially unveil the device as early as March. It will look similar to the iPhone 8 from 2017. Apple wants to address a larger portion of the smartphone market before it rolls out 5G phones this year. I spoke to Bloomberg Technology's Mark Gurman.
Apple's continuing their strategy of retaining older iPhone designs and bringing the cost down over time. So like you said, they're going to be using a design from the iPhone 8 from 2017, which originated, a few years prior to that in 2014 with the iPhone 6. Now they're going to bring the cost down to about $400, but they're going to put some new technologies like some of the cameras and processors from more recent years. So what basically you're going to get is you're going to get an older iPhone that is faster than before. It's going to work longer. But I don't really think that it's going to do exactly what Apple thinks it's going to do. I don't think this is going to be sort of their savior in the emerging markets. I think you're going to need a sort of an iPhone 10 type design, much cheaper than the current model in order to do that.
Right. Who would buy it?
Yeah, I think it's people who have older iPhones, maybe something like the iPhone 3GS from about 11 years ago now that is still somehow working to an iPhone 6 or 7 or 8 that doesn't want to shell out $600 to $1,000 for an iPhone 11 to an iPhone 11 Pro Max. They want something that is basically going to just allow their current version to keep working, right? So if you have an iPhone 8 today, you don't want to pay more than $400. You can get, a new iPhone 8 with a faster processor, the new software, and tons of new features that they've added over the past few years for that much lower price. So I think it's going to be a really hot seller, particularly in the US, some of the more affluent parts of Europe and China, but not some of those developing markets in Eastern Europe and in India.
Well, one of the biggest risks is it starts to cannibalize sales of the higher end. So instead of going higher end, I buy this cheaper end model. Do you see that also as a risk?
Yeah, I don't think there's any chance of that happening. I mean, history has shown us that the iPhone users are going to tend to go to those higher end models regardless. Part of the reason why they're using that iPhone 8 design is in order to make them cheaper to manufacture. Obviously, as you know, the longer you produce a certain design or a certain technology, the better and cheaper it's going to get. This is a tried and true design that they've been using since 2014. It's going to be extremely low cost for them to build these things. So I think that a risk of cannibalization is extremely low.
But if we're waiting for 5G phones to come out in September, why come out with this now?
The people that are going to be buying this phone don't care about 5G. 5G is still in its infancy, and it's going to remain in its infancy at least for the next 2 or 3 years or so, particularly in the US. I know it's hotter so far in China, but for this particular phone, it's really not going to matter.
Thanks to Bloomberg Technology's Mark Gurman. Still ahead, Elon Musk has plenty to dance about. More on the electric car maker's new milestone next. This is Bloomberg. Jumping on the self-driving car bandwagon alongside names like Waymo and Tesla is General Motors' Cruise. But there's a catch. The new vehicle unveiled Tuesday has no steering wheel or pedals. With the all-electric Cruise Origin, CEO Dan Ammann wants to completely replace the conventional car. He spoke to Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow.
Our goal obviously is to make transportation safer for everybody, and the best way to do that is to remove the human out of the loop and to get the self-driving performance to a superhuman level of capability.
You talked about how this would be a more cost-effective solution for the consumer, even if they're a car owner or not a car owner. But who covers the shortfall? Because it's capital intensive building all these cars.
Right, but the thing, as I mentioned, is that this vehicle will run 24/7. It'll run all day and all night. It's got a useful life of well over 1 million miles. And so the utilization of that capital, that asset, if you like, is going to be extraordinarily high. And that's what allows us to deliver such a low-cost proposition to the consumer.
Some of your competitors here in California are also testing outside of the US, in China and in other parts of the world. Will we see Cruise Origin in China? What's your strategy for China?
So our strategy for Cruise Origin is for it to obviously to scale in the United States and to scale globally. Too soon to speculate on exactly on which markets and in what cadence, but our goal is to take this to very large scale.
How convinced are you that there is a near-term opportunity in California for this to be commercially viable?
Well, we know exactly what consumers have today, right? We know what your experience is today. We know what the cost of transportation is today. And as I said, our goal is very, very simple, which is to deliver a better experience at a lower cost than your other alternatives. And if we can do that, we think we'll have really high adoption.
When I talk to different market participants and analysts, they basically say the hardware's there, and you demoed some quite impressive hardware today. What they say is lacking is the software, the computing power to make this a convincing case. How do you assess your software relative to what else is out there?
You saw in the presentation tonight, Kyle talked about the performance of our software and the fact that we're now driving thousands of miles between any kind of incident through the streets of San Francisco. So in one of the most complex driving environments in the country, if not the world, we're driving thousands of miles flawlessly with our software.
And let's think lastly about the consumer experience. You discussed the app about essentially this is a ride-hailing service, but without a driver. You talked about the big picture cost saving, but what is an average fare that you expect to charge a customer for using Cruise Origin?
Obviously our objective is to deliver a better experience at a lower cost than what people are paying today. So it's hard to average or generalize, but if you think about what you'd pay today, our goal is to deliver something better than that.
That was Cruise CEO Dan Ammann. And finally, Elon Musk had a good week. Tesla's market value surpassed more than $100 billion, surging past Volkswagen to become the world's second most valuable automaker. The Tesla CEO can look forward to a huge payout if the stock sustains its rally. For more on Tesla's remarkable run, I spoke to Bloomberg's Dana Hull.
It's been remarkable how fast it's happened. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, the market value was like 88 million, and we wrote a story that said that his payout no longer looked crazy, and then 2 weeks later, he's totally like it's in his sights. So it's been pretty amazing.
Explain the payout to me, because this isn't just a one-time; it has to be sustained on an average, right, or a rolling basis.
Yeah, 6 month trailing average, 30-day something, which I should know more about. But yeah, it's not just like a one-time thing. Right. But now that they've hit it, if they can sustain it, he will get that payout.
How do the shorts feel?
Well, the shorts are being crushed right now. I mean, they lost over $2 billion in 2019, and they've already lost that same amount just in January of 2020. But remarkably, they're not like folding. I mean, Tesla is still one of the biggest shorts that's out there. So, and if anything, a lot of them are doubling down.
Danny, we look ahead to earnings on the 29th. The big surge in the stock has been fueled by the big growth in China. They've managed to roll out that Shanghai factory with limited what's that word?
Production.
Really good production, but limited hiccups, so to speak. How much of all of this is really based on China?
Well, I think the run-up in the stock is due to three things. One, they reported a profit in the third quarter. Their deliveries for the fourth quarter were very strong, and then this China plant is sort of up and running faster than anyone expected. But going forward, there's still a lot of other potential catalysts. The Model Y is their next car. You're seeing like pictures of the Model Y all over the Bay Area, like spy shots. Like there's this feeling that like Tesla could pop the Model Y out sooner than expected.
So talk to me about that, because Elon Musk, I believe on a video, said that the Model Y could eclipse all of the demand of some of the other vehicles combined. We were speaking with analysts, and they say that maybe he likes to say that, but they're not sure that that Model Y, that kind of demand, is really there. What are you hearing?
Well, the truth is that the whole auto market is shifting from sedans to SUVs, and Tesla made the